But nice, I saw your family pictures. Maybe we can start if you're right
sure.
with that.
Ready.
Okay, okay, good. So maybe, perhaps, Madam Ambassador, we could start with our favorite topic, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, the EDCA. Yes. The Philippines and the U.S. have agreed to add 4 more EDCA sites to the existing 5. Earlier reports have identified these sites as Cagayan, Isabela, Palawan, and Zambales. Can you confirm this?
Well, I'm not in a position today to confirm anything because we work with our Philippine partners and we rely on our Philippine partners to pace out and make those announcements in conjunction with local governments, provincial level governments, to make sure that everything is laid in place. But I can tell you that we've had excellent cooperation. And you know, the military is always on a planning cycle. So even though this announcement may seem new, these are things that have been in the works for a very long time. So I look forward to being able to confirm that just by our 2 militaries, but I don't want to get ahead of that process.
I see. But would you know if these 4 are part of the short list?
I know that they definitely have a short list, but in terms of the specific sites, I don't have the information at my fingertips, but I can assure you that whatever sites are eventually announced, it will be sites that have been gone through a rigorous process by our 2 militaries to determine where we can best cooperate to make the most significant impact to ensure the security for our countries and for our peoples.
All right. On that note, is it really the priority? Because I noticed that most of these sites that are being considered, that are making it to the news, they're usually near the West Philippine Sea or near Taiwan. Is that a main consideration in choosing the sites?
You know, the overall security, again, it's 365 days a year that our militaries are coordinating. And they choose sites for any number of reasons. And that's primarily just to ensure the lives and the livelihoods of Filipinos are protected and that U.S. Security interests are also enhanced. So whether they are north or west or south, they take a holistic approach. So when you look at, for example, the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief component of the EDCA sites, because these sites also are focused on security after natural disasters, you don't want all of your sites to be in areas that are affected by disasters. You want to make sure that some of them are further away from the most disaster-prone areas so that any pre-positioned materials, for example, can be brought to bear after a disaster. So all of these multifaceted issues are taken into account by both of our militaries and then affirmed in the political process. Our militaries don't get out ahead of our politicians and our elected officials as well. So these are some of the factors that go into determining where to place these specific EDCA sites.
But these EDCA sites are going to be temporary, not permanent.
EDCA sites, I think there's a little bit of misconception that an EDCA site is a U.S. base or that somehow they are permanent structures. What an EDCA site is identifying an area where a variety of projects can take place. So for example, in the original 5 EDCA sites, I can announce today that we are going to do a groundbreaking just this month on March 20th. We're going to invite our U.S. Secretary of the Air Force to do a groundbreaking on a $24 million project that will extend the Basa airstrip and rehabilitate that to make sure that it is useful so that when planes land, they're not negatively affected. A lot of, right now, part of that airstrip is not usable because of the state of disrepair. So an EDCA site is not a thing, it's a variety of projects in a particular area. So the site itself is just an area where various projects that are undertaken by both of our militaries.
Yes. Is the Philippines the one approaching the U.S. or the U.S. is the one approaching the Philippines for the EDCA sites?
The EDCA agreement was signed, came into force, it signed in 2014.
Yes.
So, and then ratified a couple of years thereafter. But these are joint decisions. It's not one or the other. So our militaries look at what capabilities do we need and where do we need those capabilities to ensure the safety and security of our people. And we look at a secure Indo-Pacific region, but that starts with our alliance with securing the Philippines. Our U.S.-Philippine alliance I can't underscore this enough, it's cooperative, it's iterative. It is, as I said, 365 days of the year, and it's not one day one side or the other says this is what we want. They exercise, they strategize, our military folks from the ground up to make these determinations, and then that gets political approval, and then they're announced. It may seem from the outside that it was a short decision, but it comes after many months of determining what makes sense for securing our countries and our peoples.
Of course, we've encountered some resistance. I know for a fact that there are at least 2 governors from Cagayan and Isabela that are apprehensive about having their provinces used as EDCA sites, possibly, because they say that they could be military targets in the event China gets aggressive towards Taiwan. Do their fears have any basis?
You know, it is hard to imagine that any individual project in any individual province would be the target. You know, we've seen in the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea is known here, aggressive behavior against innocent fisher folk where there's no EDCA site at all. So that aggressive behavior could come in any form. It's not, I don't see the EDCA site as a magnet for that. And in fact, I see EDCA sites as a way for provincial authorities and local authorities to enhance their ability to not only to defend themselves from a security perspective, but to grow their economies. Because remember, you take, for example, rehabilitating an airstrip. The U.S. military provides the money, but we don't provide the personnel. Those are local workers earning wages here. Those are companies that get these contracts. All of those workers who are extending runways or rehabilitating runways are then buying lunch and you know, renting houses or contributing to the local economy. So, you know, obviously every governor, every government official has to make choices for their people based on what the voters want and say, but there are certainly plenty of folks and officials around existing EDCA sites that are very pleased to see the improvements that accrue from EDCA sites in terms of the interoperability of our military forces and pre-positioning, for example, humanitarian assistance, creating depots that can be used in the event of a disaster or any sort of crises. So we don't always get the disaster or the crisis we prepare for, as we saw in the pandemic. So it's good to have a holistic approach. And I think these EDCA sites are beneficial for the United States. They're beneficial for the Philippines, not only from a security perspective, but they also contribute to the local economies.
Okay, so these are the benefits. But can you talk about details as to the cost sharing between the Philippines and the U.S. for these EDCA sites?
The cost is borne by the United States. So it's a grant. This is money that comes from the United States. So for the first 5 sites, it was over $80 million allotted for a variety of projects. And as I mentioned, just the rehabilitation of the Basa airfield alone is a $24 million project. And that is a grant from the United States through our military. So that's one of the benefits of the EDCA sites. Yes. Now, how the Philippine military spends its resources, they may also undertake projects in and around an EDCA site. But when we talk about EDCA and the money that's spent, we're talking about U.S. grant assistance that we determine how to spend in coordination with our Philippine partners.
I see. Okay, the President's sister, Senator Amy Marcos, has a question. She asks, why add additional 4 sites when we already have 5 that are not yet completed and have not yet been fully utilized? How would you respond to that?
Again, these 5 sites are part of a interconnected sort of fabric of keeping our people safe. And it's not in our process of applying for grant money and getting the money here, it's not as if you pick a site and then all of a sudden U.S. Congress appropriates the money. There's a long pipeline in getting that funding approved. So that's why our militaries, as I said, are always planning for the next stage. So we are still working on these, but we can't wait till they're finished and start, or we'd have a lag time to get those up and running. So it's a continual process, and I don't see anything surprising at all that they're ongoing projects. But you are right, and Senator Marcos is right, that we need to make sure that we spend our resources wisely, and we are carefully doing that.
How many sites are we ultimately looking at?
Well, right now, under discussion are 5 now, 4 for the next phase, but ultimately it's whatever the U.S. and Philippines, through our planning process, determine is necessary to maintain the safety and security of our peoples. And in particular, from the Philippines perspective, here in the Philippines, what makes sense for the population of the Philippines.
I see. When will you be prepared to make an announcement as far as the exact locations are concerned?
You know, I don't want to get ahead of the Philippine government on that. That's a decision. Our militaries have come up with what they think is best. Now it's up to Philippine authorities to lay the groundwork with local governments, with provincial authorities, to make sure they're comfortable with what those plans are. And so that part is the Philippine side, and I wouldn't want to interject myself into that. But we are confident that in working with our partners, there's no anxiety, there's no concern. It's just part of the process of planning.
I see. Will the governors have any say as far as approval of these sites are concerned?
I'm sure that the Philippine government will take into account what the governors say. Absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay.
And we see many governors who are delighted with the results of EDCA. As for what I just mentioned, it means jobs, it means development. The secondary and tertiary ramifications of not just that security core, but what that means for the economy as well is very important.
What scenario do you see for the Philippines that refuses to add EDCA sites?
That's not, again, I think I have a lot of confidence in the leadership of this country to manage that process well. And if, I think if one site proves not to be workable, if it's shifted, that's I think very much in part of the continual planning process, what makes sense. The sites that were selected because they are seen by the Philippine military as well as the U.S. military as essential for the next phase. So I'm confident that in our partners and our allies and our friends and other officials in ensuring that process is finished in a way that makes sense for the Philippine people.
All right. So, of course, the Philippines can't possibly match the military might of China. And we need to turn to allies. Recently, just last Saturday, a Chinese warship was spotted near Pag-asa Island. And that's well within Philippine territory. Are they trying to taunt the Philippines and its allies, possibly?
I can't speak for what the People's Republic of China is thinking or doing. What I can say is looking at what President Biden is doing, and that is focusing on our allies. No matter what the PRC is doing, this relationship with the Philippines, the U.S.-Philippine alliance, stands on its own. And I said earlier, we don't always get the crisis that we expect or we plan for. So this is not about containing or focusing on the PRC. It's about ensuring our cooperation is about ensuring that our countries are as strong as we can be, not just from a security perspective, but in the economic realm as well. And we have a lot of activities, a lot of programs that in food security, in energy security, looking at women's empowerment, all of that is part of making our countries strong. That security component doesn't stand on its own. So when you look at what President Biden has said in the United States, our policy is about investing in the United States and our own people, aligning with our allies around the world, and then competing with China. And all we want is fair competition. It's not about seeing what the PRC is doing, what threatening behavior. It's about making sure that we all play by the rules of the game in the international arena.
All right. Madam Ambassador, I want to go back to the Basa airstrip. Aside from the rehabilitation of the Basa airstrip by the U.S., are there any projects in the pipeline?
Oh, there are many projects in the pipeline. There's so many that I can't even enumerate them. But it's over $80 million worth. Now that $24 million project at Basa airstrip is one of the biggest. But there are many at the 5 sites that are already named that are ongoing. Some of the projects have already been completed in terms of supply depots, for example. So it's a lot of it is basic infrastructure placement, and in the process, it's how we can that interoperability component of how our militaries work together. Because when a crisis strikes, that's not the time to make sure that our radios can communicate with each other, or that our signals, or that, you know, I'm revealing I don't know much about the military in terms of how they operate here, but that our militaries know can then just from the get-go work together without having to establish can we communicate well. So that interoperability piece is one of the main factors of EDCA, and you can't put a price tag on that. In the process of doing these projects, we gain so much more in terms of understanding how our you know, what we need to do to be ready in the event of any crisis.
Okay. Regarding the additional EDCA sites, what timeline are we looking at? When will work start on these sites, and for how long will they be around?
Well, you know, it's hard to say exactly to put a time frame on this, because the current EDCA sites were determined and got waylaid by the pandemic. So, but I would say we should be able to announce the next EDCA sites, you know, within the next several months, and then getting the U.S. Congress to appropriate the funds once there's an agreement on where they will go, because we cannot go to U.S. Congress and say, give us the money, we're going to put it somewhere somehow, but you don't need to know, we'll take care of that. Our taxpayers and our voters want to hold our U.S. Congress accountable, and so we have that responsibility. So there is obviously some time that's involved, but we're talking about months, not years. I mean, and some of them could take years to complete, depending on the complexity of the project, but basically months.
All right. And then I want to talk about joint patrols as well. There are talks of joint patrols with Australia, Japan, Philippines, and the U.S. Do you have any updates as far as discussions are concerned?
Well, joint patrols is something that our militaries have done before in the seas, and again, it's about protecting lives and livelihoods. So it goes back to that interoperability piece that I talked about, so that that we can make sure that our navies, our Coast Guard, any private vessels that may come to the rescue of a capsized vessel would be able to assist each other in a smart way. So joint patrols, or what we can also refer to as combined maritime activities, span the gamut of different types of operations at sea. So we expect joint patrols. We are pleased to see the Philippines say that they are ready for joint patrols. We have similar activities that we do with other allies, and this will be one important component of making sure that our waterways are free and open, and that we keep the lives and livelihoods of our people foremost in our mind.
I see. Do you see this starting anytime soon, these joint patrols with Australia, Japan, and the Philippines?
Well, I think the pace of that will leave to our militaries, but I think it's something that we've heard President Marcos, when he returned from Japan, talk about enhanced cooperation with Japan. We've seen Australia also enhance their cooperation. We saw a visit here, a senior level visit by our allies in Australia here, coordinating with our allies here in the Philippines. So anytime that allies work together to uphold our values, that's a win for our people. So we're very excited about the prospect, but in terms of what that means when, we leave that to our respective militaries to work out.
So would you have any details as to how these joint patrols will be carried out? When, where, how frequent?
We are not at that stage at this point, no. But again, that's a military decision. And a lot of that takes place very routinely. We have our Balakatan exercise coming up, for example. This will be the largest Balakatan, and I love that Balakatan means shoulder to shoulder, and has existed, for decades. So that shoulder to shoulder cooperation is something that happens, as I was mentioning earlier, 365 days of the year. So whatever makes sense with our assets that we have, using our with our military personnel at the ready, I'm confident they will make sure that our people are protected in the best way possible on a timeline that makes sense for all of our allies.
When you say our people are protected, will these joint patrols be able to help our Filipino fishermen who are constantly being harassed by Chinese vessels?
Well, certainly that's the goal, is to make sure that Philippine vessels and Philippine fisher folk are allowed to fish in their traditional areas. And it's not only about economic aspects of fisheries, it's also about environmental protection. We've seen recently the reports of this oil spill, and the U.S. has offered assistance in terms of containing that oil spill. So it's having that interoperability, having those patrols also allows us to have better information that we can then feed into other aspects of our alliance and of our partnership, including on the environmental side.
Yes. Recently, there was a laser pointing incident by China. And of course, we have the Mutual Defense Treaty, which states that the Philippines and the U.S. agree to respond to any external armed conflict or any external armed attack. Would you say that this laser pointing incident qualifies as an external armed attack?
Well, I will go by what I have heard Philippine officials say, including President Marcos, which is that they do not see that this incident with the laser is one that would invoke or provide the basis to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. So we stand at the ready to work with our Philippine allies. We have your back, but what our goal is, our mutual goal, is to deter conflict, not to instigate conflict. And so we work at all levels, including at the presidential level, to see what makes sense in any given circumstance. And so we take our cue in this instance, in large part, from the Philippines and from government officials who say that this does not rise to that level.
Yes. The Philippines has already filed close to 200 note verbals. Do these note verbals really achieve anything?
Absolutely. Those note verbals are so important because it's putting that aggressive PRC action, it's putting the PRC on notice. So it's what we would call legal diplomacy. In other words, if you don't do that, then you are potentially ceding your rights. So absolutely, that makes the case. It also is a way to galvanize international public opinion. We saw, for example, at the UN General Assembly recently in the vote censoring Putin's illegal, aggressive, terrible war of choice against Ukraine, 141 countries voting against Russia. And in that case, for example, that doesn't happen overnight. That is a lot of hard work, diplomacy, getting information out, standing by your principles. So having that principled stance over time is a way to build support for the Philippines should an eventuality require it, where the Philippines, backed by the U.S. as a strong ally, would then go out to international partners and saying, we need help in censoring whatever aggressive activity may have occurred.
Do you think the Philippines is doing enough? I mean, you've been assigned to China for quite some time. Do you think the Philippines is doing enough to protect its interests in the West Philippine Sea?
I know the Philippines is working very hard on this, and we're working with the Philippines, with our friends, partners, allies here. Certainly, it's not a job that we can ever slack off on. I mean, there's always more we can do. I was telling somebody earlier today, this relationship is so important, and I am so honored to be the ambassador here. But what I've noticed is that time seems to pass by too quickly here. I need 36 hours in every 24-hour day here, and I think that's how we look at what we need to accomplish as allies. So I think there's a lot more that we can do. We just need a lot more time in the day. But we're working together, and I think we'll continue to keep each other apprised. It all boils down to, I think, two really important words, and that is trust and communication. And I think we have, and I'm so gratified to see the trust that the Philippine public, from various opinion polls, puts in the United States. 88% of the Philippine population puts their trust in the United States when it comes to protecting Philippine interests in the South China Sea or in the West Philippine Sea. And we want to continue to earn that trust. We want to communicate freely, regularly, across all levels, from the local government level to Malacanang, keeping those lines of communication open so that level of trust is maintained also between our governments, between our peoples.
But do you think we're doing enough? I mean, considering, of course, the limited military might we have, do you think we're doing enough already?
I think the Philippines is doing a great job. I really do. And I think we can always do more, but again, we need more time in the day.
Yes, yes. What would we could do more? But what do you mean by we could do more? Is there any other thing that we have to possibly exploit further?
With regard to what specific
what we can
issue?
do to protect our interests aside from the note verbals?
Well, I think the EDCA sites is a perfect example. That's one thing that we can do. We can continue to work on environmental protection issues. Our USAID programs, our Peace Corps program, which is coming back for the first time since the pandemic, has a very strong environmental component. All of these aspects where we're protecting the livelihoods of our people also project an alliance that is strong, where the people-to-people connections are tight. And you know, my family comes from Texas. You know, don't mess with Texas. I mean, if you've got a strong alliance, it's like, don't mess with us. You know, and so I think we can continue to do more together in that regard. But I'm already very impressed with what we are doing together, and so gratified by that level of trust that I just mentioned.
You know, we were talking about the Mutual Defense Treaty earlier, and well, something came up that, you know, they say that it may not even be enforceable at all because even if it was ratified by the U.S. Senate, it lacks certain features to make the treaty fully enforceable. Is this true?
No, that doesn't make any sense to me. The Mutual Defense Treaty has stood the test of time, and we have heard all of you know, in nearly 38 years in the Foreign Service as a diplomat, I have never seen, within the span of 6 months, a country receive visits from the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense. And that's just, you know, 3 of the big 4, as we say. We also have, you know, Secretary of the Navy, the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Too many, we just had Undersecretary Newland, the 3rd ranking official at the State Department. But my point being, we have a commitment to this government. We've underscored that. And so this is a way of projecting how significant this relationship is. So when it comes to, and I'm sorry, what was your question again? I had a point I was going to make with demonstrating this, but
yes, no, about the Mutual Defense Treaty being enforceable.
In those visits, thank you. In those visits, each and every one has underscored the importance of that Mutual Defense Treaty and the fact that it applies to public vessels and the military, and to our to both countries, mind you, public vessels and aircraft and our military, including in the South China Sea. So those visits here have been a way to demonstrate that our commitment to the Mutual Defense Treaty and that it remains valid, it remains strong. It has stood the test of time, and I'm confident that it will stand for many more decades to come.
Good. So it's definitely enforceable. No truth to the other comments and the other legal opinions that say it's not.
I've never even heard that.
Okay. So China continues to build more structures, you know, in an area that the UNCLOS has said rightfully belongs to the Philippines. As an ally of the Philippines, until when will the U.S. tolerate these expansion activities of China?
Well, again, these are activities that are occurring in areas that are in the Philippines exclusive economic zone to a large degree. And they also are occurring not only in the Philippines EEZ, but in the EEZs of various other countries as well. Yes. So what we need to do is look at not what the U.S. will do, but again, getting back to that diplomatic piece that I mentioned about what we can do together, whether it's through ASEAN or at the United Nations or with, looking at the 2016 arbitral ruling that gave, stated very clearly that China's claims in the 9-dash line were invalid. So we need to work collectively to underscore to China that this aggressive behavior will not stand. So it's not for any single country to do, but it's what we want to do in conjunction with our allies.
Well, recently some pretty strong words from China's leaders. You have President Xi Jinping saying the U.S.-led policies may lead to catastrophic consequences. You have the Foreign Minister Qin Gang saying if the U.S. does not hit the brakes but continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing or a crash, and there will surely be conflict and confrontation. Would you like to comment on those words?
I think I'll repeat what I said earlier, which is the President Biden's commitment to our friends and allies around the world. We've seen that in many fora. When you look at, I guess I would point to the statements that you make and then say who's lining up behind those statements. Where are the friends and allies that are supporting those statements? We stand by our allies. We are working together collectively to make sure that we can uphold the safety and security of our people. I would just leave it at that. I think, and it's not about the United States coming in and dictating any single policy or any proposal. We're working together to determine what makes sense for each of our allies and what, even more significantly, what we can all do together.
Okay. I want to go quickly on the European Parliament. They stand solidly behind Senator Laila de Lima. May I ask if the U.S. has a stand on Senator Laila de Lima?
The U.S., as a democratic country, wants to uphold human rights, good governance, speedy and access to fair and speedy trials all around the world. And we work with our partners in that regard. When Senator Markey was here earlier, well, I guess late last year, he was able to visit Senator de Lima and speak to her to underscore that the U.S. Congress certainly continues to be interested in her case, as we are in all cases where a speedy trial is not forthcoming. And this is making sure that we have a free judiciary that's free from coercion, that upholds the rights of citizenry, is a challenge for every democracy. Certainly, you look around the 50 states in the United States, we have some issues there, and we want to work with the Philippines on that. And we do have quite a few programs that are focused on working with the courts and professionalizing courts. We're looking, for example, to digitalize data so that cases can be brought more quickly to trial. So we certainly are concerned about the judiciary as we are in our own country, and as something that we discuss with all of our democratic friends and partners.
Madam Ambassador, you mentioned earlier, that we had some very top-level visits recently. We had Vice President Kamala Harris and the Secretary of State Antony Blinken visit last year, and then early this year we had Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Are we seeing a visit by President Biden anytime soon? Certainly,
I would be very delighted to welcome him. I don't have any information about a trip in the works right now, but I know that our friends here in the Philippines would be delighted to receive him. So anything that we can do, we would turn on a moment's notice to receive him as soon as we're given the nod.
How about any news on this possible state visit?
Well, again, I don't have the calendar for the White House, but I can say that we at the embassy and our colleagues in Washington are certainly working hard to make a visit to Washington a reality. It's the White House calendar is always challenging, but I know just seeing, for example, that President Biden met with President Marcos in New York. Remember, that was during the height of the U.S. election period. President Biden met with, I think, 4 or 5 only leaders from around the world, and one of those was President Marcos. So I think that underscores that the Biden administration, that together with the other high-level visits, is absolutely committed to this relationship. And I'm sure that, again, if we had maybe in addition to 36 hours in a day, we need maybe double the number of days in a month. We could certainly make that happen if we had that time, but we're working hard to get that scheduled with the White House.
Would you say, how would you rate the alliance between the Philippines and the U.S. at this point? Is it stronger than ever?
It's certainly extremely strong. I don't have the basis. I can say it's exhausting, that's for sure, to go at this pace. It's exhausting in a good way. It is something that is so rewarding to work on a relationship that's so important. It's hard to imagine, as I said before, in 38 years, and I'm not talking about just 38 years when I was in smaller posts. I've been in posts like Beijing and New Delhi.
Even Ukraine.
Even Ukraine. I've worked for Secretary Kerry. I'm dating myself, but I also worked in the office of Secretary Christopher. I've never seen this high-level engagement in such short order. That underscores the very importance that the United States government is placing on this relationship. Now, whether this is the highest point ever, certainly in recent memory, certainly in my 38-year career for sure.
Yes, okay. Of course, I know that you strongly advocate for women. Does the U.S. Embassy have any initiatives that are in line with this advocacy of yours?
We have a lot of many activities through USAID, through our Peace Corps program, through our public affairs program, working with women entrepreneurs, small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, for example. So, and even also through our public diplomacy outreach, promoting women in sports, promoting health care for women, looking at ways we can protect children also, because like it or not, globally, around the world, child care almost invariably in every society, certainly in the United States, tends to fall disproportionately on the shoulders of women. So looking for ways that we can support children is another way to support women. And we have many programs and look to do much more in the coming years.
Been here for 8 months. What would you say is your top experience here in the Philippines?
It's, you know, the top experience is just the interactions with people every day in all walks of life. The warmth of Filipinos toward the United States. And I want to give a big shout out to your overseas Filipino workers. I know GMA has a global following, and specifically and particularly all of the Filipinos and Filipino Americans in the United States. As you know, there are almost 4.5 million of them in the U.S. I'm sure many of them watching this program and GMA regularly. And those people-to-people connections are just so foundational to our relationship. And as the ambassador, I am seen as kind of the embodiment of that, and it's a great honor, it's a great privilege, and it is an absolute joy to be here. And as I said earlier, a little bit exhausting because there's so much
a
going
lot of
on.
eating, I'm sure.
Oh yes, the trajectory of our relationship has really been straight up, and also my weight gain has followed that same trajectory.
You look good.
But Filipino food is amazing, and the hospitality is like nothing I've ever seen, and the warmth of the people, our strong people-to-people ties. It's just very fulfilling to be the U.S. ambassador here, and a great honor.
Good. Do you know how to cook any of these Filipino dishes?
Well, if I knew how to cook anything, it might be a Filipino dish. I have to say.
What would it be?
Well, I don't. Whatever's easiest is what I would choose. But I love lumpia, but that's actually very labor intensive. And what I've seen people make lumpia, and all that rolling and all the dicing and everything beforehand. But I also love adobo. It's amazing, and
of course.
And so many amazing desserts as well. But those also look very difficult to make. I have to say, we should do a cooking show. Do you have a cooking show I can join?
Of course
But
we
it
do.
needs to be one of those cooking shows for people who do not know what they're doing in the kitchen. That would be me.
That would be me too. But thank you so much. It's such an honor. Thank you for spending time with us today. I've been so excited for this interview, and I'm glad it finally happened.
Well,
I hope there will be many more.
Well, thank you so much. I would love that.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Madam Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, you